horror show. Argentina, the war that disappeared. And many, many other countries around the world. We can't even begin to name the countries. I think William Blum compiled by Freedom of Information Act, I think we intervened in about 60 or 70 countries, America, to fight communism. I saw it in other countries as well. I'm not going to single out necessarily America, except that it's the most powerful country at this time militarily. But we saw it in France. We saw the collaborators work. I mean, my mom's French, and I was always hearing about the French resistance as a kid. You would think my mother's family, my entire family was in the resistance. It wasn't. Most Frenchmen went along with the Nazis. Not that they collaborated, but they lived. They had to coexist. But that was a great mythology about the resistance in those countries. And the Russian contribution to World War II was diminished and hardly talked about in America. The great loss of life and the great war that was fought in the East. And at the same time, when I was researching dissidents in the 1980s in the Soviet Union, there was another form of denial, which was that these people who were really courageous people opposing the regime, who were going to psychiatric institutes, the Russian people did not understand them, and I felt very sorry for these people. I tried to do a movie about it, but it could not get financed. But I remember at that time, this was in the Brezhnev regime, how much of a hero Joseph Stalin was to the people, to the average Russian who did not really know about the great purges and terrors and famines of that period, of the 1920s and 30s and 40s. Self-delusion of a population in denial and is overwhelming to me still at my age. I mean, in China, which I've visited several times, I see a new generation, young people crippled with amnesia, unable really to gain access to their own history. And then I see a generation of my age, older Chinese people, and men, women, and I'm amazed what they've been through in their lifetime, far more than I have, because they have lived a sort of a Lewis Carroll life where it's been a 180-degree turn in the middle of their lives. At the age of 30 or 40, they've moved from collective communism and worship of one god, Mao, to a brutal, highly brutal, competitive individual consumption and corruption in the name of another god, money. The Russians too, by the way, that generation, although most of them have died because their life expectancy was so short, but so many Russians went through communism to robber baron capitalism in the 1990s and 2000s, particularly under Yeltsin. I think we all lie to ourselves in some way during the course of our lives, and I cannot fault ourselves for doing so, because the forces of history and conformism are very strong, and they pull us along. We go to schools, we have to conform, most of us. We don't want to get thrown out. Our parents, we live in a way that we have to be generous to ourselves, otherwise we will probably end up like some of these poor dissidents in a psychiatric hospital taking medication and being force-fed. And I've seen some people who have suffered so greatly and been killed or went to prisons. I mean, it's a very hard price to pay to be a nonconformist in these societies. So we have to forgive ourselves for our mistakes. And I'm not a moralist on this issue, and I don't want to be the guy who's always saying, resist, 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 because we're scared. I'm trying to be a realist, though. And as life goes, I'm trying to undo some of these knots of perception that we all have, and I have, so that we can get a more truthful view of the world, and certainly, for me, my own place in it. And I've devoted some of my movies to trying to undo these knots. But I have to say, when you see the self-deception of societies on the level of China, Russia, the United States, or my own country, in its recent debacles in Iraq, I cannot help but wonder at the sinister perspicacity of the Nazi dictum, the greater the lie, the more readily it will be believed. I've seen so much evidence, and I'm sure you have, of in our life of history being rewritten. And what's more, I think we've come to accept it, that history belongs essentially to the victor. And that we can never, never, never underestimate the power of corruption to change and alter history. We may have believed briefly in the 60s and the early 70s that things would change for the better, but I think most of us have gotten a rather brutal awakening to the realities of existence. And I think the way life has worked since the beginning of time, I think history has been not available to most people. And as a society, I'm sad to say, I've come to find it's still very much like the third grade. And we behave like a lynch mob. We pile on. I've seen it again and again, whether it's in a combat platoon in the grip of fear and wild rumor in Vietnam, or a student revolution without rules, or whether the strongest rule through intimidation, or Wall Street stock madness, or 2001 9/11 hysteria, and an immature president who divided an unsettled citizenry for political advantage. And nor can I forget vividly how many liberals supported that stampede as a result of not clear thinking and fear and terror, and granted Bush Jr. his war powers. That too was a conformist mob. In the name of not being hated for our dissent, we, the American people, signed off through our legislators on most of our essential liberties, on habeas corpus and on torture, without knowing it. I would say to you, we don't even have rights anymore. They're gone, because every American I know of any sensitivity has some innate understanding and fear that each and every one of us can be listened upon. Our email and bank accounts, our medical records, our sexual priorities can be known. And at the end of the day, we can be destroyed financially, reputationally, and even physically by our own government and media, if they so want it. The right to any privacy at all has been sacrificed on the altar of this false god, national security. And it has happened as much of evolution happens in unseen, quiet, in the middle of the night conditions. It's apparent to me that it comes not as a coup d'etat, it comes as a fait accompli. The other day in America, for those of you who were paying attention, the Supreme Court voted again 5-4 to basically, essentially emphasizing again the right of corporations to contribute any amount of money to political candidates through propaganda groups, not directly, but through propaganda groups. So what you're saying is that my money or my vote is essentially the same as Exxon's $100 million into any issue that they want. This is the end of democracy as we know it, because we can be buried by money, and it's perhaps always been the case, but now it's gotten worse. And the court again reaffirmed that the corporation is a human being and has the rights of a human being. So we find ourselves in this perilous time, and it's a dark time. It's darker than anything I've known in my 60 plus years. And what are we to do? Are we to acquiesce? Do we have a choice? Are we to die like slaves? Or is it possible, like Spartacus's, to resist? To join others in an assembly of honesty and goodness, and find ways to restore decency to this rather terrifying world? What are we to do? Can we heal ourselves? Not only ourselves, and in the process, can we heal our planet? Can we legislate clearly and collectively an end to carbon emissions into the atmosphere? We know we can, but can we do it? It takes a collective will, and like lost children, we all look to the leader who will take us to that will. We want it, and yet we don't seem to need it enough. And it's need, that one need, and it's through that sweat and toil of needing, not wanting, needing, that we will get it. So I believe in our movies, in our dreams, I can help, people like me can help a little, a lot, to point out that this will happen if we wanted to. I think Mr. Cameron, with his blockbuster Avatar, has made a film about an ecological paradise to remind people of the alternatives. And in so doing, he has, whether he admits it or not, has crawled into the unconscious of the world, and perhaps has done a great deal of good, although he denies, again, that the movie has any political implications. And so it is with movies. They work best subversively, as guerrillas of the mind. They approach the individual in the dark and revive the memory of how things can be. And sometimes, though rarely, these films can create a collective action. But as my experience of making Vietnam movies, or Salvador, or JFK, or W, or Alexander, has taught me that we must accept our limitations with humility and hopefully with a deeper understanding of our weakness and frailties. We must undertake every one of our actions with all the ardor we can muster. At the same time, we must be able to walk away from the result of our action with detachment, even if it is loss. But I won't give up believing that movies can help in some way, as I said, by expressing the best in us to help others to connect, to light a candle in this darkness, to our memory, to our imagination, and to our civilization. I hope in my daily life to struggle to keep my consciousness growing and not to fall asleep, which I've done many times in my life. I want to teach my children by broadening their minds as best I can, by traveling them to other experiences in the world, by teaching them where I can my own tolerance and appreciation of what freedom is, and reminding them by example the price at which it comes, by which I not only mean silver. I hope people will leave our movie theater renewed and made sacred again, that movies can heal the tribe and not tear it apart. I really want to believe there is something beyond the physical. There is within us the great metaphysical, a reaching to the stars to survive, an ability to overcome our differences and obstacles, and even the greatest of them all, the warming of this planet. Rothke wrote, "In a dark time, the eye begins to see." In that vein, we must all remember, we are in this together. We drink the same water. We struggle under the same sun. We all sleep,